Welcome back to the Conversations with Jeff Bucknam podcast. I am your host for the next few episodes, Jeff Bucknam, and I am having conversation today with another Jeff Sharda, and Carl Barkow's here. We're hoping he doesn't talk as much, but Jeff Sharda, it is great to see. Jeff Sharda is the, what is your official title? Please don't say Chief Financial Officer. Stop it. That's not a church title.
I will not say that. I am the CFO. Also known as the Chief Financial Officer.
All right. So in a church, he looks after the finance. And it is really great to see you. How long have you been at Harvest Bible Chapel, Jeff Sharda?
We have been attending here for about 7 years, and I've been on staff for 5 of those.
Wow.
Yes.
So where did you first start attending? Do you live near Aurora?
Real close. Yep. We live in Batavia and started attending Aurora right away.
Okay, so that's where you started coming to. Yeah. You didn't come to you didn't ever saw anybody live.
Never. Every now and then.
Well, I came down to Aurora and I was live and you didn't come then either.
So, nobody gave me the memo that we were having a special guest, so I happened to miss that week.
Well,
he only attends live.
I know he does.
Or non-live.
He attends.
True.
He attends occasionally. Jeff, where are you from?
I grew up in Michigan. In the west side of Michigan, and then spent 12 years in Colorado.
So the west side of Michigan, what town? What's the name of the town?
A little-ish town called Holland.
He's Dutch.
That's I think that's not little-ish, is it?
It's little-ish.
Because I've heard of Holland, Michigan. Yeah. Why have I heard of Holland, Michigan? Is it a...
Tulips.
Tulip time. You're right in the middle of tulip time right now.
Yes.
Tulips and windmills.
That's right.
Did you grow up farming, or was your family involved in tulips in any way?
I couldn't grow anything, so no, I did not grow up farming. But I do have a little bit of Dutch history that my father actually runs a store that imports Dutch food.
Stroopwafels.
From the Netherlands.
Oh.
From the motherland.
Honestly, they are... Stroopies are the best... they are the best dessert there is.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a stroopwafel and you put a dollop of vanilla ice cream on that baby?
No.
Oh.
But you can dip it in coffee. It's also
This is true.
Magical.
Yeah. They're great when you go biking, too.
Yep.
Excellent source of energy.
Yes.
So how Dutch are you? Like clog-wearing Dutch? You're very tall. You're a very tall guy.
Blonde.
I would say I'm 100% Dutch, meaning my full lineage is Dutch.
Yes.
So I'm purebred.
Okay. So how many of the Dutch jokes or the jokes about Dutch people are true? I mean, the tall thing, that's one of them that is true. It seems like every Dutch person I meet is really, really tall. The amount of money they like to spend or not spend, is that a true?
Yes. 100% accurate.
Okay.
That's what makes him a good CFO.
So
Listen, if we ever go on a date, Jeff, we're going Dutch. All right?
True.
All right. I guess we won't go on a date then, Jeff. But you were trained. You went and lived in Colorado for a while. Where in Colorado were you living?
We lived in Colorado Springs.
Oh, why?
I moved there for work. I was doing public accounting at the time. And,
okay.
Yeah.
And what was the name of the firm that you were with?
Cape and Krause.
Yes. Very famous, I think. Aren't they one of the large firms in the country, right?
They're one of the well-known firms in the nonprofit industry. Yep.
Yeah, because if I've heard of them, I pay very little attention to the accounting world, but if I've heard of them, they must matter a little bit. But yeah.
Sure.
Colorado Springs. And then you moved back from Colorado Springs back to Illinois. I find that interesting. Guy from Michigan. Is your wife from this area?
She's also from Michigan. We landed here primarily because the firm I was working for had an office in this area and asked us to move back to the Midwest.
Okay.
So we did.
Did you find that difficult?
Yeah.
What about it was difficult?
Leaving the mountains.
Okay.
Going to a big city.
Colorado Springs is not tiny.
It's not. No, it's probably about 600,000 people.
Okay.
It's small by comparison to Denver, though.
Yes, true.
Yep.
True. Have you been to Garden of the Gods?
Yes, many times.
Very neat spot just north of Colorado Springs there. So,
yeah.
So do you miss, I'm assuming you miss Colorado Springs a little bit. Do you go back and visit much?
We go back probably every couple of years, and I don't miss it until I go back.
Oh, okay. Your kids, though, born there?
All of them.
Okay.
Yep.
Do they remember it much?
Oldest two do. The younger two do not.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay. So why did you start working at a church then?
Well, that's a very good question. The accounting firm I was working for, I mentioned they work a lot with nonprofits. So I love churches. I did a lot of work with churches, and we were attending harvests. One day I'm working at home and my phone rings, and I answered it, even though it was kind of after hours. And it was the former pastor here called and just said, "Hey, you ever think of doing anything different?" To which I said,
"Sure.
Maybe, but not really. This is all I've done since college." And so we started a conversation, and about 6 weeks later, I was here.
And now it's stuck.
Now it's stuck.
You're so deep into the black hole. There's no way out.
That's right.
Right.
Yep.
Well, that's great. I've enjoyed getting to know you, Jeff. Jeff, you're a big cyclist.
Yes.
Yes. Is that like if somebody wanted to know something that was really important to you? Obviously, your faith in Christ, the fact that you don't want to spend any money on me, and then third, it's the cycling, isn't it?
My family might come above that.
Oh,
maybe.
But like a personal thing.
Yep. Probably number one hobby would be cycling.
Okay.
Yes.
So how long have you been cycling?
Maybe 12 years.
Okay. Are you very good at it? You fast cyclist?
I mean, I do my best to keep up with Carl.
I don't know about that.
So I hold my own.
Okay.
He's fun to ride behind because of his size. He does great drafting. It's really nice.
Right. Are you, do you ever race in cycling?
I have not since I've moved to Illinois. I did a couple of races in Colorado.
Oh, so do you hill climber?
Yeah.
You enjoy the good hill?
Those are fun.
So you usually know when you're talking to somebody who's serious about cycling is when they say stuff like hills are fun. Because most of the people who are involved in cycling, who aren't avid about it are like, yeah, I don't feel that way all the time. But they can be actually. The more you do it, the more you cycle, the more you're thinking, actually he'll break things up a little bit.
It does. Yep.
Well, that's great. When's the next time you're going to be racing your bike?
Well, that's a good question. Maybe we should race.
Sorry. Do I get a head start?
Once you get your
or
e-bike.
an e-bike.
Yeah.
Oh, e-bike.
One of the two.
That would be good.
That's my hope. Jeff, we are talking in this little series of podcasts about money and possessions and things like that. You have a particular, you actually oversee the stewardship ministry of our church, which includes a whole bunch of stuff. Benevolence.
Yep.
Which, tell me what benevolence is.
Benevolence is, I think of it out of the book of Acts, where believers have come together to say, hey, we're going to basically care for others that have need. And so what people have done is they've given into this pool of resources that's managed by the church to help others within the church that have a need, such as paying a mortgage, paying a utility bill, a car repair. The car's ministry falls under this ministry as well. So,
right.
Yeah.
So does some of the Hope Center stuff here in Elgin.
Yeah.
So you guys are actively involved in that. And so can I give money to this? Can anybody give money at all? It's not something that's publicized that much, though. Right.
So the Lord really brought in an incredible amount of resources in 2020. When we had this pandemic, there was a wonderful, I would say, movement of generosity that people said, hey, we see others in need, we're going to give to this. And so we've been able to continue to utilize the resources that came in then to meet the current needs we have. We still have people give towards this effort, but we haven't had to make a big push to increase the resources there.
Right. But if somebody is interested in giving particularly to care needs or benevolence,
absolutely,
that is something you can get in touch with Jeff Sharda, J. Sharda.
That's right.
At harvestbiblechapel.org. Jeff, you've had a particular interest in money, though, obviously, because you're an accountant and financial officer here. And What do you think about these passages of Scripture that we've been working through? Like, what's your overall? We've been through 3 passages.
Mm-hmm.
What is your overall like vibe about them? Have I missed it? I've missed it all.
Well, I mean, yes, and not at all.
Okay.
No, I've. You knew this about me, Jeff, before you started. I was going to love this series. I did share with my small group a couple of weeks ago. I said, we're talking about money for the next 6 weeks, and they all kind of looked at me, and I went, guys, I'm really excited. And I know, but I'm the money guy, right? So of course I'm excited. But I think it's been super helpful to really step back and think through. And I love actually these first few passages have all been out of Luke.
Yeah. Well, Luke's got a
fun.
special interest in it.
Yeah.
And that was actually on purpose. The Luke 12 passage is a story of the rich fool, but I wanted the next 2 show both positive and negative examples from Luke regarding what it looks like to not be a fool or to be a fool in that particular case. And so you got these 2 examples. This last weekend we talked about Jesus and Zacchaeus, the wee little guy who is a chief tax collector who ended up climbing a tree because he wanted to see Jesus. A very, very no thing in that particular culture if you're an important man. And then Jesus stopped and welcomed him into his life, and Jesus actually kind of welcomes himself over to the guy's house. I'm going to come and stay with you.
Yeah.
And Zacchaeus responds to that pretty remarkable move of grace. I mean, prophets and others don't spend time with wicked sinners, especially not chief tax collectors. And Zacchaeus responds by giving away half of his goods, which is
substantial.
Yes. But not the same amount, by the way, of what the rich ruler was asked to give, who was asked to give everything. And so this is actually one of the questions that some people raise whenever they talk about this stuff. I mean, when the rich ruler is asked to give everything away, should he be giving everything away? Well, the intent that Jesus has there is that the money that he has should be at the disposal of Jesus or to give to the poor, or he should actually abandon his trust in that. The amount differs with different people, right? So for Zacchaeus, he expresses his faith by giving half, which, by the way, would have left him a substantially wealthy man. But it's still a pretty sacrificial move on his part. I mean, you think even guys like Elon Musk, if they were going to give half of their stuff away, it would be still a pretty big deal.
Right.
And then Jesus pronounces that he can tell salvation's come into this guy's life because of what he's just done.
Yeah.
And Luke holds this up as the example of discipleship in his book. Because it does have to do with money, and I think for Luke anyway, that money is core to what he sees, people loving over God. So, it's an interesting passage, and so I'm interested in your take on it. You have a page of notes that you took on my sermon. I don't even take that many notes about my sermon.
That's
two pages of notes.
Wow.
And dated.
Yeah. This is important.
Anyway, no, I'm interested to hear your thoughts about the passage and about different questions or things like that came up as you were listening to it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Honestly, the first time I heard it, we were driving, so I didn't get to take notes.
Do you
I got
go to
listen
church?
to it a second time.
Do you actually go to church
Once
though?
in a while,
Like,
we do darken the doors, but
because the
this
2
weekend we
times
did
we've
not.
asked you about church.
My face is like, oh, what?
Okay. Yeah, anyway, you're
we have
driving the first
this
time.
we have this wonderful
You're so-
online.
You're busy on the weekends. You work
Weekends
hard
are-
during the week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He
He does go to
most
church,
of the
and he
time.
values the
That's right.
gathering of
Yes, he
the
does.
community of
Let
faith.
us not neglect to be together.
Okay.
Anyway, my wife was taking notes next to me while I was driving,
Okay.
and you said probably 2/3 of the way through the sermon, and I said at the end, I said to my wife, "What was that line?" He said, because it stuck with me so heavily. But it was, and I'm going to read it here, but it was, our generosity toward others will rise or fall based largely on our sense of God's generosity towards us. And I don't know. I've been working to even just get that ingrained in my head, because I think that's such a, it's so true. Like, do I understand the generosity that God has poured out towards me? And is that reflective in how I respond to others?
Yeah, one of the things that most thank God has made a comeback in the last number of years among Christian teachers is the belief that the gospel forms not just the basis for your conversion, but the basis for your whole life. And that the prime motivation that you have in the scriptures to obey God in the new covenant, right? So under the New Testament, is not law. Yeah. What you don't get from the Apostle Paul when he's explaining stuff, or Peter or the other authors, Luke, you don't get a lot of, hey, do this because you were told to do it. That's there, by the way. I mean, there are, to call Jesus Lord is to submit to him and his authority. But when you get these specific issues, oftentimes what you get is you should do this because Christ did this. Do you know what I mean? Like, you should love your neighbor as you've been loved by Christ. So think about how much you've been loved by Christ. So then pass that kind of thing on, or use that as a model. The rain falls on the just and the unjust alike. Look at how God is, and to be a child of God is to be somebody who reflects what he's already shown on you and everybody else. Do you see what I mean? So the gospel forms the basis then for the actions, or in theological terminology, we end up saying things like the indicative drives the imperative. The indicative, the statement of who you are and what God has done for you, actually is the basis for why it is that you should do something.
Yeah. The whole premise for the book of Ephesians, right?
But you don't often, man, I've heard a lot of sermons on money. Often what you get is give money to God because he will then owe you. That's one option. Give money to God because he told you to. And if you're not giving a certain amount, he's not happy about it. You're stealing from him, which, by the way, is language from Malachi. So it's not biblical language. Or what you get in the New Testament often is give money to God because you're investing in a kingdom in response to his grace that is worth more than anything you could ever imagine. And it's that last one that we're really trying to not just focus on, but show, hey, this is actually what it says. This is actually what the reason you're supposed to do it. So that's one of the reasons I included this one, because it's such a lovely picture of grace and how that drives us forward in giving.
Yeah, it's the delight.
Yeah,
over the duty.
It's not a duty.
Yeah.
It's a delight. Do you think people view it that way though? Giving.
Yes.
Well, you do. Why do you do?
As a delight or as a duty?
As a delight.
I do. But I wish everybody did.
Okay, what makes it so it's delightful to you? Because it is. You actually find great joy in giving.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, and I will credit my wife for helping me to get here, because it's not natural in my core being to want to be, to give, to be generous. But she has really stretched me to say, hey, it's not ours anyway. Money comes, money goes, and I think you've been talking to a lot about a river, right?
Yeah.
And if God's pouring money into this river, we should be pouring it back out.
Yeah.
So we were talking even this morning, and I will challenge anybody that happens to be listening now, but I think I would ask any listener if you've ever made a gift, a generous gift, and if you've ever looked back and gone, I wish I hadn't done that. And I think I've never talked to anybody that has said,
no, I've never in my own life. That's
No.
That's never been the case. Yeah. It's actually always been a rich blessing, both to me and to the person, the people who received it.
Or further, it would have been, I wish I could have done more.
Right.
And by God's grace, maybe I will be able to someday.
Yep. Yeah.
So are you, I'm interested to find out how you came to this then. Like, as somebody who's not like that, what kinds of principles or ideas did your wife say to you? Was it just the fact that it's not your money? That was enough?
That was helpful. Yeah. And alongside that,
what kind of practices do you put in place? I'm actually trying to ask if there are certain things that you do, your family does, that stretches you in this area and that has led you to be in this position that others who aren't in that position. Because I do believe that for most people, whenever they hear some pastor or anybody who's picking up a Bible saying, hey, you should be giving, they hear duty.
Sure. Yeah.
So help me understand how Jeff Sharda moved from duty to delight.
So again, I credit my wife on helping to just change my mindset early in our marriage. In addition to that,
Was that hard for you guys in your marriage?
Oh yeah, at
Because
first
finances are a big issue for a lot of young married couples.
Yeah. So wait. We want to give this away? And she said, "Yeah, of course. That's what we do." So
you said by we you mean you.
You, yeah. And then shortly after we were married, probably 2 years in, we took a Crown Financial class, which is the old Larry Burkett.
So tell people who haven't been around the church for a long time, what is that?
It's similar to like a Financial Peace University, Dave Ramsey, but I would say more scripture focused, more.
So it's a course. It's a course about money.
It is
from a biblical background, although this one has more biblical content than say some of the other ones that are more newer.
Yeah, and really drives at the point through the whole course of everything belongs to the Lord. Psalm 24, right? It's all the Lord's, to the point where one of the people we were taking the class with, we're all young out of college, so don't really have much in the way of dollars and assets. Something dropped out of his garage and landed on his new car. And his response that he shared with us later was, "God, why do you want this dent on your car?" That was, and that has stuck with me because I think it's just such a pure and clean look at, like, it is the Lord's. Yeah. So let's use it and give it back to Him.
Yeah. So. Did he give back the car right then?
Yeah. You can have it back.
Now that it has a dent on it.
Yeah.
That car's the Lord's. I'll drive the other one now.
That's right. Totally. So in this passage, well, actually, I wanted to ask a question related to the last passage that we studied in the rich ruler. You have this interesting, Luke is intending a comparison. Here you have this rich religious guy, and he turns away from Jesus because he's asked for his money, and you have this rich, irreligious guy.
Sure.
I mean, he's basically said, look, my religion, my devotion to Israel is so small that I'm willing to actually rake them over the coals for my own personal benefit. Yeah. So he's an irreligious guy, sinner, as they call him, and yet he responds with this fantastic. So there's intended to be this comparison going on in the passage. But in that passage about the rich ruler at the end, we brought it up last week, there's this language about the church being the centerpiece of how you're going to be taken care of. Because this is a question everybody has. Well, what if I give up all this stuff? Well, what will I have? And stuff like that. And I wanted to bring up today this passage in Acts chapter 4, which we've looked at even in the last year or two, but people might have missed it a little bit. Acts 4. What text am I looking at? Acts 4.
32 through 37.
32, yeah.
They had everything in common.
So, Carl, you read it.
Okay. At the risk of talking too much, let me read the 5 verses.
Well, it's not you talking so much as the Word of God, so we're okay with that.
Good point. I'll just be.
By the way, everybody, I'm totally kidding.
I'll just be the narrator.
I tease people I love, and I love Carl and Jeff.
And we've had the pleasure of doing this now. This is our third one.
Yeah,
and we only have 2 left, so it's great.
Okay.
Acts 4, starting in verse 32. Now the full number of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and no one said that any of the things that belonged to him was his own, but they had everything in common.
Which is, I just stop real quickly because essentially, if it doesn't belong to himself, I do think that the intention there is, no, it actually belongs to God, and God wants it to be shared with the community. I think that was their attitude.
Yeah.
Yep. Actually, so I'm reading from the ESV. If you look at the NRSV,
New Revised Standard,
that translates like this. Now the whole group of those who believed were of one heart and soul. And this is an interesting part. No one claimed private ownership of any possessions, but everything they owned was held in common. That probably means something to you and some finance peoples like me. To be held in common, it's actually it's a literal legal banking term,
right?
To be held in common versus jointly.
Yep.
But there's that commonality of the ownership of the possessions is not to be missed here.
So is that communism?
No.
Oh, you hesitated, didn't you? You're such a Stalin.
I didn't know who you were asking, him or me. So
I'm asking both of you.
Go ahead.
Yes, I don't believe so. I believe that the main component of this is to remove the selfishness of possessions for the benefit of all who share in the same heart and the same soul that the Spirit has been moving in between.
Yeah.
And isn't part of communism that it's demanded of you? It's
Yeah.
not something you're willingly.
Well, I don't think
saying,
anybody
"Here."
would disagree with the fundamental idea behind communism that wouldn't it be great if we lived in a world where everybody had enough to live on, and that those who had more would be willing to share it with those who had less. I think that the heart of it is that. The next step is, and we can make that happen if you just let us be in charge of it. So socialism. So we start doing that, and we extract certain things from some people and give them to others who are part of our special interest groups or things like that. And so in the end, communism's a naive concept because you can't, in a sinful world, you can't do it. But the miracle of the early church is that nobody needed to mandate this.
Right.
It was just happening. That's the kind of, to use the language, koinonia. That's the kind of fellowship that they were having with each other that was so robust that when somebody like the fund that we have, Benevolence Fund,
yep.
they were like, no, I see people who need that, so I'm going to give it to the leaders of the church so they can distribute it among those who do need it.
I'd probably, to say it's just happening, I mean, there's an agent here. It's the Holy Spirit. It's
Sure.
being manifest through a love. Like, think about it in our families. We care for, not out of duty for our children or our spouses, or, we do it out of love, that we share all that we have for everyone in our family. Next of kin. How big does your family go? Could be cousins, could be anyone, could move into your house. You would feed them gladly from all that the Lord has provided. It's a wonderful extension into non-bloodline family, but one heart and one spirit type family. That's a huge difference between that and communism.
Well, the church is supposed to be the primary family of God, which is it's interesting you even use that language. Well, of course you'd share with your brother. Of course you'd share with your kids. Of course you'd share with that. That kind of is the attitude that the scriptures have, or God does. That's right. You guys are all brothers and sisters. Of course you'd share with your brother. Of course you'd share with kids.
Sure. And there are modern day communities that are like this, like that actually they live together, right? A commune or a...
Jewish culture had them.
Isn't that where...
Aren't
they the ones in Waco, Texas, that the FBI
maybe.
attacks and stuff?
At Baylor University.
Okay.
Liberty is a bit of a bubble.
Liberty University lives like this.
They do. They're a bit of a bubble. The Liberty bubble.
They do not.
My son goes there. I love it. It's the best school.
We lived in Israel for a semester, and they have the kibbutz.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Same idea.
Yeah, and there are groups. Seriously, not massively, religious groups in the traditional sense of that term,
right?
Who live like this in parts of the world. They live in community life and stuff. But even there, you end up finding it breaking down significantly. I think that the point that Luke is making in Acts is that here's what happens when the Spirit comes upon a group of people. It perpetuates. But I don't think it's a repudiation of any kind of capitalist ideas. There are in the scripture people who have more and people who have less. Right. I mean, Solomon had more, and he was God's king. Even in the New Testament, you have some who have houses and others do not have the same houses, and so that distinction is not necessarily a sinful distinction.
Right.
But those who had more recognized their responsibility toward those who had less.
To be generous.
Yeah, and that's why they had it.
Yeah.
And this is an example of that. So what, verse 33?
So I want to...
Yeah. Carl did not just read his 5 verses.
No, I read one.
No, I'm letting him read more.
Okay.
That was one.
But I mean, he talked way more than the 5 verses.
Oh,
all right.
Come on. Well, you know me.
With great power.
With great power. It is with great power. The apostles were giving their testimony to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ. Great grace fell upon them. Verse 34, there was not a needy person among them, for as many as were owners of land or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold and laid it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to each as he had need.
Run right over that? Those are remarkable acts. I mean, seriously, guys, if I've been involved with people who've been in lawsuits, and their big complaint is, man, I just don't want to lose my house. I just don't want to, you know what I mean?
Right.
Well, here are people who actually are giving up their homes, which were probably ancestral. So it's not like it's meaningless house. They didn't just buy it 3 years ago and somebody else lived in it a long time ago. They're like grandma and grandpa and great grandma and they all probably lived in this same place. And so they are selling those properties because the family of God matters that much to them, which is crazy, right? And some had extra. At the end here, you have the last part of the passage is about Barnabas, Joseph, who was also called by the apostles Barnabas, which means son of encouragement. He was a Levite, meaning he was a priest. He was a native of Cyprus. He sold a field that belonged to him and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet.
The really countercultural thing in here, too, is back in Greco-Roman time, it'd be fine to share, but you would share it at a socioeconomic equal level. To what's groundbreaking in this passage is to share with someone far below you as someone of means.
Well, even in those days, you might share with somebody who's got less, but it would only be for a patronage thing. Do you know what I mean? Like
reciprocity or something.
Right. Yeah. You're trying to get something in return. That's what's so interesting about this passage is there's no agenda being had with it. The idea is, look, I recognize that God gave me this money or this land, these sorts of things, and he gave me for just such a time as this, that I might be able to use it to supply the needs of these people at this present time. This is actually one of Paul's big arguments when he gets into the collection for the poor in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. He comes to the Corinthians and he's like, look, you have plenty at this point while they have need. And he's kind of pointing to the providence in that and saying, hey, kind of like when Joseph showed up in Egypt and was told to set aside a certain amount so that when there would be, God has already done that in your setting and you have it and your brothers and sisters need it. So just recognize your responsibility to give it to them. Which is a very different attitude than that's on a church level, but a very different attitude on an individual level. We tend to think that my excess that I have this year is not necessarily something that I have because I'm called to share it more liberally. My excess is something that I have so that I can have the new boat or the new whatever, that kind of thing. So is it a sin, Jeff Sharda, to buy a new boat?
No. Maybe. I should say it may be.
Okay, so help me through that, because those are the questions that people have in the end, right? We can talk forever about the principles and things, but people start thinking, all right, how much is too much? How much money should I be giving? What does God want? When is it wrong to buy a bike? How expensive should the bike be? They want rules. Give us some rules, Jeff.
There's no limit on the bike. Kidding. I'm kidding.
Think of all the carbon credits you're earning.
Gas savings.
It'll pay for itself.
The big thing, honestly, for me, and when I've been asked this question is, are you being obedient to the Lord and doing what he's asked you to do with those resources? If you feel like he's allowing you to buy a boat, I think you can buy a boat. If your sense is, no, I should probably be...
So there's a conscience thing you're saying.
Yeah.
So this is why you shouldn't deaden your conscience.
Right.
There are going to be some people that buying the boat is going to be something that their conscience permits them. And others, it will not.
Right.
Listens to your conscience, which, by the way, should not shock anybody. That's the case in a lot of the disputable matter issues. There are some people whose conscience would allow them to go and sit in a bar and drink, and some people it would not allow. But that conscience should be listened to by the individual Christian, and it should not be denigrated by anybody else.
Right.
Which is the problem here with money, because there will be people who have the freedom of conscience to purchase something because they're like, no, I don't. My heart's not being dragged away with it or anything like that. I want to use it to serve other people. Yeah, we have 2 properties, but the other property is free for everyone to use. So is this one. It's all the Lord's. Yeah. Whereas other people don't have that freedom because they know full well that if they got it, it would be something that they'd be tempted to love too much and hoard. But those things have to be decided, I think, by the individuals.
Yeah. And your spouse, if you're married.
Yeah,
I think it's so important, right? That the Lord has given us, I mean, the three of us have wives that we, thank the Lord, can process that with and let the Spirit lead us.
Right.
And,
there just doesn't need to be, my fear is that there ends up becoming legalism around these things sometimes. And the fact that somebody chooses to have something and somebody else chooses not to have it, there are 1,000 reasons why that might be the case.
Yep.
One of those might be their hoarding, but that's really something between them and the Lord that they need to sort that out.
One practice we've done too is to, especially on a purchase, using the example of a boat, it's to not rush into it, but to take the time to be prayerful and to wrestle with, like, is this a need or a want?
Yeah.
What's my definition of need at this point in my life, or a want at this point in my life? You know, and
is it wrong to have a want, to have something you want?
I hope not. Because
no, I mean that. I mean, I'm just picking. I'm a little bit picking on you, but at the same time, I do think that so your language there, not that you intended it, but just for sake of discussion, sounds ascetic to me. Do you know what I mean? Ascetic, like monkish to me. Well, you should only have your needs. Yeah. Yes and no. Well, I mean, the Lord gives us everything we have so we might enjoy life.
It's just a boat or a bike might be a need to a person who's 1,000% inside and has not had the enjoyment of being outside in creation, and that's his means to be doing that. There could be, they're subjective, right? I mean, those words are. If you have 3 boats and you're going to get a 4th, it's probably more want.
So, well, this is where we start raising questions, though, about. I think in some ways what I'd like to say is that I'm not sure that the need versus want is the appropriate category. The question is, are you sharing what you have with other people, and are you just collecting things to collect them?
Right.
And you know what I mean?
My point in the thing was to be.
Your point was to sin.
My point was to take the time. My point was to be judicious with your time when you're making those decisions. I think that's a fair discipline for people.
It is, very much so.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with a want, right? And realistically, in the Western culture, there's very little we need because we have food on our tables every day.
Right.
You know, if you go to a third world country where they may not have 3 square meals a day, that's a legitimate need, right? So, but I don't think the wants are bad necessarily.
No, they're dangerous, right?
Yes.
And that's the same thing with most good things, right? The wants are good, might be for good things. It's just that they can be dangerous if and handled with care, right? So if I have my heart set on a particular bike and I'm finally by it, there's a temptation that I'm going to have to be like, no one is touching it ever. I will only ever keep it in this glass case when nobody, and the kids stay. See what I mean? You all of a sudden you start treating the thing like it's an idol, because it is an idol to you. And so these are the challenges that you have in your heart and mind when you start thinking about a lot of these things. But I do want to make sure that the people who are listening to these sermons and stuff recognize that one of the big parts of the teaching about money in the Bible is that money itself is a good thing, that physical things are good things, and riding a bike and having the wind blow through your hair and feeling the shifters on the bike because you went and bought the better shifters, feeling them shift well is a lovely. It's great. Sure. It's great. But that's something that you need to decide between you and God regarding what you need, what you don't need, and it's okay to want to have some, a nice shirt, but hoarding lots of nice shirts is probably overboard.
So let me ask you this. Is it okay to have the nicer shifters or the nicer shirt if you are either being stretched so much to be able to buy that thing, I don't know. Or
if it's limiting what you can give, I would probably be like, One of the things I tell people a lot whenever they ask me for guidance about stuff like this, one of the things I tell people is, and I might have said it in a previous podcast, that the one thing that should feel like you're being stretched by is your giving. right?
Yep.
More than your mortgage, more than your other things, that the amount of money that you're giving, you're like, it feels a little much.
Yeah.
That practice is, I think, puts us in exactly the kind of position that the Lord wants us to be in. That, Lord, you're going to have to come through for this to actually come to reality. And there's going to be other areas in our lives that you're going to have to provide for, because we're taking a risk here.
Yeah.
And as you'll hear this weekend, I actually think that the promise of Scripture is that he will take care of all of those things.
Because there's got to be a source to the river. And
Yeah.
if God's the source, that has to be the promise.
And I think that the more water that flows down there, to use that image,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The more water that flows down the river, the wider the river gets, and its capacity to flow more water down gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But the goal of the river is to pass it down. That's how it grows. It gets bigger by the flow, whereas lakes don't. Sorry, ponds don't. They're just what they are. In fact, they end up drying up, don't they?
Yeah.
Or becoming stinky. I just watched a video with my son on YouTube about there's a whole bunch of stagnant water above a beach, and a kid who's really good at like surfing and wakeboarding created a little path for all that water to start to drain into the ocean, and it was down a steep embankment of the beach. And within a matter of an hour, what started as a very narrow stream got deeper, 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 and wider. An hour and a half later, there were 3 guys abreast, all surfing the high flow, and it was a foot to 2 feet deep through the beach. It had carved a canyon in the sand,
right?
Because more and more water was making its way and flowing.
It's a great picture. I'm going to use this picture this weekend. No, if you hear this right now,
it's awesome.
You come to church. I am absolutely using it. I'm not going to tell Carl that it's his. I'm plagiarizing it 100%.
It came from YouTube.
I said it first. I'm the only person who's ever thought of this, ever.
Because we're of one mind, so you can just immediately take it and claim it, being of one heart.
That's right. It's mine.
It's mine. You're mine. I have a question from this, but you have like 2 pages of notes. We should get to those and see.
All right, we're almost done. So you get the last couple words here, Jeff Sharda. So you tell us some other things that you've been reflecting on.
I mean, that's an open and a loaded, wide open question. I love it. I do have a question out of the passage actually.
Yep.
What is it that got Zacchaeus excited about seeing Jesus? Do we know?
I think that he was. Well, I think 2 things in the background probably are getting him excited. Number one, that Jesus is a miracle worker, right? And second, that I'm quite sure that the stories of him mixing with tax collectors and sinners had already come. And a guy who is a social pariah, seeing that there is an important, influential guy who seems to have God's hand on him, who's accepting and treating. He's hanging out with lepers, and he's talking prostitutes and other tax collectors. I would imagine that in and of itself was enough of a draw. It's quite an act on his part too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like there is the beauty of this passage. There's a whole nother sermon to be preached about his act of seeking. Right? Like he was willing to be a fool.
Yeah.
Right.
He was willing to be a fool to have Jesus, which is interesting because immediately prior to this passage, you get this story about this blind beggar who's yelling his head off, who also is willing to be a fool to come to Jesus, right?
Right.
So there is kind of in Luke's mind saying, hey, anything that you do to have Jesus is worth it.
Yep. Even climbing in a tree.
Even look like an idiot to all of your friends and neighbors.
Yeah.
Because you will. That's one of the reasons. I mean, I think it's in Matthew's. I can't remember, Matthew 13, I think, where you get the parable of the pearls and the
pearl of great price.
Pearl of great price and the field. Yeah.
Which are in the field. Yeah.
Which is interesting. The field is an interesting picture
like
too,
kingdom.
because so in that passage, you go and you buy the field, and you sold everything you could to buy the field.
Right.
But nobody else knows the treasure's there. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So everyone's going to look at you and think, what kind of idiot are you to sell everything you've got to buy that field? And yet I bought the field
there's oil.
because There's something in it
Yeah.
that's worth more than I could ever
Kingdom.
imagine.
Right.
And I think that generally that's kind of the idea, is that when it comes to Jesus, the wider society will look at us and think we're crazy because we're investing in the kingdom with the belief that the kingdom is worth more than any of the goods and material possessions we have. And yet we know as Christians that actually in time, at the judgment, we will be vindicated.
Yeah. And even today, I think we're being vindicated.
Yes.
Right? Because that, as you said, this weekend, and I'm excited to hear about this weekend, but the river is widening as it's going down the riverbed.
It is. Those are the prophets coming in. I mean, to use the parable of the minas or the talents, however you do it, like as the great flow increases, the pathway is this is kingdom minded. To use his term, prophets. For the kingdom.
Yeah.
This has been fun, Jeff Sharda.
Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, I thank you for coming. We like talking about money with you. Thank you.
It's really fun.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carl, for being here and adding your expertise to all
I'm like
of
the
these
color
matters.
commentator. Like, you're the main dude.
Yeah.
And I just like throw
You
in
just make that.
throw a word in.
Watch this. Watch this. Watch
Hey,
this.
hey.
See this guy? See this guy? He blocked. See him? This has been really fun. Hey, listen, next week, join us again. We'll be talking about 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 5 to 16 or something. No, 6 to 15.
15.
And we'll be talking about that. And so you can read that if you want to get ready for this weekend in our services. And it's a great passage. You'll come to church and you'll be a little surprised.
I'll come this week.
Okay, thanks, buddy.
Yeah.
All right, I'll see the rest of you later.